reflects to imbibe values of responsible and productive citizenry, and to meet the challenges of multicultural societies and globalization. We do this in living up to our motto, as you saw on the video, of inspiring futures and nurturing possibilities, and in keeping the great talents in our UKM intact. More importantly, it is also in full cognizance of our role as a national university. Over time, we have kept national, not just Bahasa, which is expected to produce, protect, and inculcate the idea of national self-knowledge or culture and values. Apart from promoting Malay as an academic language, the cultural mission recognizes knowledge as the defining elements in the preservation and propagation of values such as responsibility, right and wrong, good and evil, traditions, customs, experiences, meanings, beliefs, and material objects which cover the course of generations collectively, to give us our identity or national self-knowledge. And our role in reconciling this cultural image of ourselves with the global quest for peace and understanding. In this quest, we hope to stimulate independent thinking and opinion-making about societal issues such as hunger, health, poverty, social imbalance, climate change, environmental degradation, cultural divide, and conflicts. This morning, we are gathered to hear Professor Kornberg's views on basic science, the hope of progress. UKM is honored to present this public intellectual, and we have taken the liberty to print a short biography of his illustrious career in the cutting-edge field of molecular biology. Please do read it. His research epitomizes the kind of most important chemical discovery envisaged by Alfred Nobel in his will. From his discovery of the nucleostome and his studies on how genetic information is copied from the DNA to RNA, Professor Kornberg has further unlocked the mystery of life. Ever since DNA was first isolated in the mid-1800s and demonstrated as the double helix in the mid-20th century. This deoxyribonucleic acid, as we know today, contains the genetic instructions used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms and some viruses. Professor Kornberg has shown how information stored in the DNA segments or genes is passed on as instructions to construct other components of cells, such as proteins and RNA molecules, as well as how this process is regulated or mediated. After hearing you, Datuk Laidi, I'm convinced Professor Kornberg and his father have mastered this process very well in winning the Nobel Prize. More profoundly, Professor Kornberg has shown the molecular basis of our similarities. We may be divided by geographical, cultural, and ideological boundaries, but our life processes are the same. It is not too late, and I, on behalf of the audience, take the opportunity to personally congratulate you for winning the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2006. I know of no other person more eminent than Professor Kornberg to speak on basic science, the hope of progress. Professor Kornberg.
Madam Vice Chancellor, Mr. Morowitz, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm most grateful for this opportunity. I am more than pleased to participate in this important Bridges program. It is a pleasure to visit for the first time this country and this great university, and I'm most appreciative of your hospitality. In a recent contribution to Bridges, the physicist Sheldon Glashow, who you may have heard, who spoke elsewhere in the program, commented on the importance of basic science, which I noted in the title. And I might point out, I have presented on this slide a shortened version of a longer title. I addressed the same subject as originally proposed, and this, as I say, is a kind of summary statement of the title. Sheldon Glashow commented on the importance of basic science, and in particular of serendipity, of chance discovery, for technological development and for benefits to humankind. In his lecture, which you may read, he gave examples from physical science, and he described their impact, in particular upon engineering. I myself have often made similar arguments in relation to biomedical science and its impact on human health. I would like to begin today with biomedical science and then extend the discussion begun by Professor Glashow along several lines to include the following: the underlying reason and the indispensable nature of basic research, the meaning and the mechanism of serendipity, of chance discovery, the relationship of basic science to industry, to government and to society. Finally, the relationship of science and religion, which must be addressed in any such discussion, including the implications for cultural accommodation between peoples and ultimately the peace, which is the purpose of the organization sponsoring this series. Now, let me make one disclaimer. I must emphasize at the outset, my expertise lies in a limited area of chemical and biomedical science. I'm not a social scientist, and my opinions on such matters are entirely personal. They may be of interest, perhaps even provocative, but they carry no more weight than those of any other member of this audience. Let me begin with the history of biomedical science. Some of the important points that I'll make are summarized on the first slide. It may surprise you to know that medical science, as we understand it today, is only about 100 years old, whereas physics and chemistry began centuries before. Human biology was largely neglected. Human disease, until recently, was attributed to an imbalance of humors, and the treatments were bleeding and violent hurls. Doctors were not even educated men. With the first stirrings of medical science, the president of Harvard at the time, Charles Eliot, proposed adding it to the curriculum at the medical school, to which a noted surgeon in the medical school and the faculty there objected this would be impossible because few of his students could read or write. Today, medical science stands as a triumph of intellect and the greatest frontier for intellectual activity of the future. If the 20th century was the age of physics, then the 20th century is surely the age of biology, and especially the age of human biology. Now, this is not to diminish the ongoing importance of the physical sciences. Quite the contrary. The boundaries between scientific disciplines have largely disappeared. We have today a near continuum of science from the atomic level to that of the whole organism. This is a remarkable event that has taken place before our eyes and that we've barely noticed over the last half-century, but we have all been present to witness it taking place. We will one day understand every aspect of human life in chemical and in physical terms, and with that understanding will come control. Control over disease, control over behavior, including tolerance and aggression. Even control over aging and the future of the human race. Of course, how we exercise that control is a matter for everyone equally to decide. The past affords clear guidelines for fulfilling this great promise. If I were to ask you, what were the major advances in medical science over the last 100 years to which I've referred, most of you would come up with a similar, if not the same list. You would think of X-rays for diagnosis and treatment. You would think of antibiotics, which have largely eradicated bacterial disease. You would think of non-invasive imaging, for example, magnetic resonance imaging or MRI for early detection of cancer and other conditions. And surely, most of you mentioned genetic engineering, which is the basis of most new medicines. And the list would go on. All these medical advances have one thing in common. They were all discoveries made in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, without any idea of an application, with no notion of curing or preventing disease. The lesson of the past is therefore counterintuitive. It tells us to solve a difficult problem in medical science, don't attempt to do so. Don't study it directly. Rather, pursue a curiosity about nature, and the rest will follow. Do basic research. I think it's instructive to examine a couple of the examples that I've given, X-rays and antibiotics, in more detail. What one learns from the history of these particular examples is particularly illuminating. X-rays were discovered by Wilhelm Röntgen. If you will turn to the next slide, please. X-rays were discovered by Röntgen, the only child of a textile merchant and a manufacturer in the Netherlands in the 19th century. At age 18, he was permanently expelled from school for refusing to inform a classmate who'd drawn a caricature of a teacher. And he was never allowed to attend another school in the Netherlands or in Germany again for that offense. He nevertheless, because of his great ability and his passion for science, went on to an academic career, eventually became chair in physics at the University of Würzburg, where in 1895, he was investigating the external effects of passing an electrical discharge through a cathode ray tube. And he just happened to notice a faint shimmering on the fluorescent screen elsewhere in his laboratory. He saw that faint shimmering little hint of light on the fluorescent screen was present even if the cathode ray tube was completely draped in black cardboard or cloth. And he realized that a new kind of rays emanating from this tube must be responsible, and he named them X-rays. Actually, at the time, everyone else called them Röntgen rays. But being the modest man that he was, he insisted on the name X-rays. After that, he investigated what kind of material might block the rays emanating from the tube. He held various materials in front of the tube for the purpose, and then saw on the fluorescent screen an image of the skeleton of his own hand. This, of course, led to the immediate medical application of this basic discovery in physics. Within a year or two, it was already in widespread medical use. And in 1901, Röntgen was awarded the first Nobel Prize in physics. Now let me turn again very briefly to the history of antibiotics. Many of you will have heard the famous story of Alexander Fleming and the discovery of penicillin. You may not know, however, that it was a previous chance finding made by Fleming that formed the basis for the discovery of penicillin, and moreover that he never pursued the medical application of penicillin. Now, Fleming was a professor of bacteriology at St. Mary's Hospital in London, and he was growing bacteria that cause disease to investigate what might be used to prevent their growth and proliferation. He was growing them in a dish, and one day he had a cold, and a drop from his nose fell into the dish, and it killed the bacteria. He traced that effect to a protein in this drop that fell from his nose, a protein called lysozyme that destroys the cell walls of bacteria.